So the package with this week's DVD was delivered at the right time, but the tracking for Postal Service didn't update until about 3.5 hours after it was delivered, and I don't want to bug the people in HR to check the mail or get a copy of the key or whatever, because they're not comfortable with it. And so this week's just these 3 things that arrived because of the Postal Service's barely useful shipping information. So the first off is actually a hentai. I've noticed that it's just not so bad on the cover as normal. This isn't actually a new release, but this was a re-release that I missed earlier this year that I've been eyeing the entire year. It's just I've been needing an excuse to buy it. It came out back in January. We have a Marine Boy Season 3, which I'm not sure how much of this is the Japanese version. All of it is Japanese or whatnot. I haven't looked too closely, but this is from the Warner Archives, so I'm guessing that they got the rights to it a long time ago. They get to sit on these series that they dubbed a long time ago. And I've bought the other 2 season releases, and I guess I can open it and show that it's purple. It's burn on demand. It looked like there was another anime released from in the Warner Archives that was burn on demand that could have arrived today. I don't know. The tracking for that one is hard to track. And then we got Ghost in the Shell Arise 3, imported from Japan. I mean, I think Funimation finally imported Arise 2 at some point, but I'm not in a particularly big rush myself. Well, I mean, I don't see a need to wait. I mean, because obviously if I bought this before Funimation officially imported it, then it means that I'm not waiting or anything. I'm going ahead and importing it because it's a bit like Gundam Unicorn, I guess, except I don't know. But I did notice that there are going to be DVD releases of Ghost in the Shell Arise. Episodes 1 and 2 are going to be on a DVD released in September, I think. This one, pretty much just the Japanese release, so a lot of this stuff is nigh indecipherable to my non-Japanese reading eyes or brain or whatever, but it doesn't matter. Should still have English subtitles. And I guess I'm kind of not discerning the small text, so I'm just saying there we go. And unfortunately that's all of this week's update. It would have been twice the size if the package had arrived, because there was 3 other DVDs that came out this week. I think it actually a total of 5 that came out, and then there was the other burn on demand movie that was arriving, but 2 of the things were delayed until Thursday, and I think that would be the Dr. Slump movies and the well, I guess I don't remember what the other thing was. But I know there was something else. I know of the 3 that did ship, 2 of them were Problem Children Come From Another World, Don't They? Or something like that. I don't remember what the 3rd one was. But I guess that's okay, because last week I really wanted to watch The Devil is a Part-Timer, and so of course I put that on immediately afterwards, and that one was actually very fun. Well, I guess I didn't think about how I would summarize it here, which is kind of unfortunate because, like I said, it was fun. I mean, it was well executed, it was very thoughtful and very curious, and I would definitely want to see more of it. And I think that pretty much puts me in the same boat as everybody else who watched it. after that, I watched my teen romantic comedy Snafu, which I guess I'm trying to remember exactly what the Japanese title is. Not in Japanese, but the translation. It's something kind of similar, like my teen romantic comedy isn't supposed to be this way, or something like that. And off the bat, it seemed like the main character would be a somewhat cynical, sympathetic character. And I initially felt that maybe he was thinking about things a bit more shallow than I would. I mean, as a rough example, he does talk about in one episode about the difference between being a pack animal versus a solo animal, and he talks about wanting to be a bear and how bears are sole creatures. And I couldn't help but think about bears can survive, there's no doubt about it, but there's something to be said about how we are all composed of a bunch of individual organisms. You can think of us as sort of like ant colonies on a microscopic scale, where the entire idea is the body is composed of cells, and cells are almost standalone organisms, except they're supposed to work with each other. Sort of like how a worker ant can't really maintain the colony on their own, it would probably die out. Couldn't even reproduce, I guess, unless a worker ant can suddenly become non-sterile. But the point is ant colonies, are kind of like not very genetically diverse, because the entire idea is the ant colony itself could almost be seen as the organism, except that we understand that the individual components are very macro scale. And so along those lines, I'm just saying that even as an individual creature, a bear is already not just an individual, because it's already a colony of cells working together to stay alive. And so along those lines, I was kind of feeling a disconnect from the main character. But I think most people are familiar with where I go from here, because on a certain episode, I suddenly realized, hey, I've seen a YouTube clip of this exact scene before, because that's the moment when the main character starts making some observations about reality that we don't really... They're uncomfortable observations about reality that we don't want to think are true, but we can't help but feel like he's maybe right. And I guess I don't want to go into too much detail about what he talks about, but the idea is that after that, he does some things that are just like, alright, those are very unconventional things, but he's making some points that I'm having trouble disagreeing with, and taking actions that match what he's talking about pretty well. So I'm not sure if I could call it a feel-good anime so much as kind of... It feels like it justifies underlying cynicisms you might have, and it's very comforting in that regard. And overall, I thought it was interestingly thoughtful. Not exactly complete. There's some points that I would point out where, like... I guess I can't really talk about those points without really talking in detail about some of the things he talked about, but for the most part, I think that his observations are just like one or two steps away from additional insight, I guess. And so that makes it kind of fun, because it seems a bit smarter than a lot of anime, and it's very convincing in that regard. Even more so than like Code Geass, which will say, I do this because all the people will act this way, and then at some level you have to realize that we see Lelouch as smart, but people are acting that way not because people act that way, but because the story has them act that way. Now, that does raise a question in our minds of, do I act that way? Would I act that way? How should I act differently? Make sure I'm doing the right thing, etc., which is useful in its own regard, but doesn't necessarily mean that Code Geass is necessarily right in that regard, right? And so I'm saying this anime seems smarter than that because of stuff. But maybe that same criticism I just leveled at Code Geass applies to the anime as well. I don't know. After that, I watched Severing Crime Edge, which was a very strange show. And I know it's really weird to say that in the presence of anime, especially if I tried to tell you what was weird about it. You would kind of say, that just sounds like your average anime. And I think to a certain degree, there's a lot about it that's really nothing particularly new. There's some new ideas in there, but I think for some reason it feels very contradictory watching it. Like, you're I don't know. It may be sort of similar to what the Futurama characters, how they reacted when they learned that they were going to be killed by death by Snoo Snoo. And that's not exactly the right way to describe it, but I can't help but wonder if that's along similar lines. It's the feeling they kind of go there where it's like, where you're not really quite sure what to think, because something about it feels contradictory and wrong and not, I don't know. So I'm guessing that's why that one scores a bit more on the miss side. I think it means that there's a lot of things in there that could hook somebody in, but it probably left a lot of people unsure if they really wanted to. Maybe. It's completely speculative. Because, yeah. Oh well. So, once I finish that, one of the reasons I'm okay with this week's arrivals being delayed is because I was going to prioritize rewatching To Love Ru, which I never really realized that somebody on the anime subreddit on Reddit pointed this out, that the title is a play on words that might not be too obvious to an English-speaking audience, because we pronounce love as love, when a Japanese person would pronounce it labu, and so it's tulaburu, which means trouble, and that's the anime in a nutshell. I remember it being a lot like that. I just didn't remember the intricate details. And so I'm only like a couple episodes into rewatching that, the intention of rewatching that to then follow up by watching the seasons 2 and 3, which I've never seen. It's kind of interesting rewatching the first season. I remember some of the frustrations of watching it the first time with, to a certain degree, we want the main character to be happy, and we feel like the universe is going out of its way to screw him over, and not in a way where he's just being unfortunate, but where the writers of the show are deliberately going out of their way to screw him over. So it doesn't quite feel like maybe I'm as invested at this point, but I remember it not always being that way. In fact, it kind of feels like it's going away from that pretty quickly. But I don't exactly remember when I stopped thinking of it like that, because as it is right now, it is kind of your stereotypical-ish harem, sort of. But it's kind of a refreshing watch. One of the things I kind of noticed while watching it, there's some aspects of it that actually remind me a lot of Urusei Yatsura. I think I watched Urusei Yatsura between now and the last time I watched To Love Ru. But I couldn't help but wonder if there was maybe a little bit of inspiration from Urusei Yatsura in there. And I guess I'll probably have more thoughts on that next week as I rewatch more of the series and confirm, yes, there's this heavy element of this and that in there. Now, obviously, there's not the Lum being the jealous, controlling electric girl, but there is little things like, Lum would accidentally feed some sort of Oni candy to something, and then it would become superpowered, and Lala does the same thing in To Love Ru. There's Yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting thought, and I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is. I'll probably talk about that later, like I said. So, all that aside, I guess that's this week's anime DVD collection update. Sorry, it's not too big, but eh, this week I figure since half of it is already here, might as well. So y'all have a nice week, and hopefully next week we're gonna have. I think next week is when the Cardcaptor Sakura re-release happens. So hopefully that will all arrive, and y'all have a nice week.